So I have an idea for a Scooby Doo reboot. A way to completely modernize the characters. I'm talking complete reinvention of everything you know about Scooby Doo. So picture this. Scooby Doo, but the mystery gang are now millennials. It's genius, right? I know. I'm proud of it too. Scoob is the latest attempt to reboot Scooby Doo, and the biggest compliment that I can give Scoob is that I didn't mind it. It was certainly better than I thought it was going to be, but that's because I expected a rather directionless animated film with nothing of substance to offer. And I would say that for the most part I was wrong, but there is a really strange thing that Scoob does. It is a good enough movie in terms of its vocal performances and the animation. There are some instances of really good animation, especially towards the final act. The vocal performances, I think, are pretty good to great for some characters, and I'm going to elaborate on that right now. But before I get there, the weirdest thing about Scoob is that it's not necessarily a Scooby Doo movie, in the sense that it's not trying to tell a standalone Scooby Doo story. It's almost trying to set up a Hanna Barbera animated cinematic universe, because it introduces Dick Dastardly and Blue Falcon. And Blue Falcon is voiced by Mark Wahlberg, and he was the big standout in this movie in terms of vocal performances. I thought it was really interesting to hear Mark Wahlberg voice a superhero, because Mark Wahlberg is obviously a big name actor, and his name has been thrown out there when it comes to fan casts of certain characters. And you know, it was surprisingly nuanced. Now, it was nothing earth-shattering, obviously, but Wahlberg's performance was surprisingly, you know, there was actually something to it. It wasn't Mark Wahlberg doing the Mark Wahlberg thing where sounds like he's asking a question with every line of dialogue that he's reading. You know, he wasn't voicing the character like, what's happening? I don't know what to do. I don't know. My dad was a superhero. I don't know how to fill his shoes. I don't know what to do. You know, he wasn't doing the Mark Wahlberg thing, and that was nice to see. And he was by far the most interesting character in this movie, which is just kind of another thing that really detracted from this movie, because I feel like it wasn't really a Scooby Doo movie, because a Scooby Doo movie is supposed to focus on, you know, mystery, the dynamic between the group, and obviously Scooby Doo himself. And Scooby does play a big role in the film's plot, but that's really it. The movie doesn't really look at the relationships between any of the characters besides Shaggy and Scooby, and I understand why you would want to look at those two characters specifically, because they are the ones with the strongest bond. But the movie just feels a little bit scattershot in its approach, because they try to deconstruct some of the Scooby-Doo mythos, and the way that they do this, as I said, is by trying to modernize them, by making them millennials, and kind of have a little bit more of a political correctness. And they also poke fun at the old Scooby-Doo tropes. There's a line in the movie where I think it's Daphne that says, you know, that sounds like what a middle-aged white man thinks a teenage hippie would talk like. And I'm like, huh, I understood that reference. And then there are just weird lines like, toxic masculinity. Said by Velma, because there's a little skirmish that goes on in the movie during what I honestly thought was a pretty funny moment, but there's just some really weird writing and delivery of the dialogue at times in this movie. And again, I feel like splitting up the group is probably not the best approach, because what ends up happening in this movie is it doesn't feel like a Scooby Doo movie, because it's not really focused on the gang. It's more about Shaggy and Scooby hanging out with Blue Falcon and his crew and trying to be superheroes. And this movie is trying to be a superhero movie, set up a Hanna Barbera cinematic universe, and also trying to reboot Scooby Doo all at the same time. And I don't think it does any of those particularly well. There are elements of each of those that I think could have been interesting, and I think there are elements in each of those that are enjoyable at times, but I think the movie was just trying to do too much, that it didn't really give itself a fair chance to be just a good Scooby Doo film. But overall, Scoob is interesting, I guess. It does make some interesting points, and I think really some heartfelt points about the relationship between man and dogs, which is difficult for me to think about right now, because I recently lost my dog to cancer, and there's a lot in the movie that I think will resonate with dog owners, and I think that's where the majority of this movie's gravity comes from. Is it is definitely appealing to dog owners, specifically with its final act. I would say that for the most part this is a movie for kids, except for the end. There's definitely some stuff at the end that adults will be able to chew on and appreciate. The end becomes a little bit more Pixar-like, if you will. So, overall, I think Scoob is okay. It's not great. It tried to do a little bit too much, and I think it weirdly was trying to be a superhero complete with its own skybeam. But aside from the fact that it was trying to be a superhero movie, I just didn't really feel like it was a Scooby Doo story. There have been attempts to deconstruct the Scooby Doo mythology before, and I think it's been done much better in a movie like Scooby Doo on Zombie Island, so I would say go watch that unless you are absolutely terribly bored. I do not recommend Scoob, just because I don't think it's worth the price that it's probably available at on VOD. If it was maybe $2, I would say go for it, but at a more likely rental price of something that's a little bit closer to whatever the price is on Amazon, I would say probably give it a pass, unless you are a really, really big Scooby Doo / Hanna Barbera fan. But if you want to tell me how wrong I am, feel free to do so in the comments section below. That's what it's there for. Thank you for watching, everybody, and may your heart be your guiding key.